Friends, back in the 1990s, Toyota experimented with something called Project Genesis. That morphed into the Scion brand in 2002, and its primary focus was to sell cars to Gen Y, now old people. That went along swimmingly until the world fell off an economic cliff and there weren't so many new Scions. Then in 2012, Scion made a huge splash with a car not made by Scion. Now fast forward to 2015, we have not one, but two new Scions. So today, let's focus on the one that has the toughest job competing in the compact car world, the built in Japan 5-door Scion IM. So yes, this is a C-segment car and this is more about value, but we are still going to look at the engine. This is a 1.4-liter four-cylinder engine, puts out 137 horsepower, that comes in at, let's just say, a very aggressive 6,100 RPM, and it's got 126 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at an also very high 4,000 RPM. Now that is connected to two transmissions. You've got a 6-speed manual, which I highly suggest, and then there is a CVT. We are not even going to talk about CVTs because we've spent a lot of time going back and forth about these in our Nissan Maxima film. But really, the focus of a car like this is not just some style at a low price, but really MPG. So how does that translate to MPG in this case? So with the engine that has the manual transmission attached to it, you get 27, 36, and 31, so 31 combined. If you were to go with the rubber band, then you get 1 MPG higher in either case. But how does that translate out to the road? So if you've been on our journey for the past couple of weeks, we've been driving some rather powerful cars. So how does this four-cylinder translate to the road? Well, is it 600 horsepower? No, but it's very respectable when you're driving around town. Now get it up here into the canyons and you're going to be working the transmission more. And this is where I know I always talk about manual transmissions, and I would always say, you should get a manual transmission, but in this case, I think you really need it because you're going to be working the gearbox more to get more energy out of this engine. So like, for example, let's go around this turn here, and really, to get this thing to accelerate, I've got to be in second gear, so there's not a hell of a lot of time to upshift and then downshift in corners like this. So the power band is still very high for this thing, but it's, let's just say that in the CVT, you definitely would feel flat-footed in situations like this. But take it down the mountain and into town, and that's where you get kind of an even power delivery. So the good thing about this engine is it's not peaky to the point of you would feel there's like no low-end grunt when you're driving around town. Actually, grunt may be a very aggressive verb there. Let's say low-end power. So this is a C-segment car. So what does that mean to car guys like you and I? Well, it translates to the focus being more about efficiency and price, not so much driving dynamics. So if you look at cars like the Hyundai Elantra, that's what this car would compete with. Like the rear suspension on something like that is a torsion beam. Not something that excites car guys like us, but value-conscious buyers, that's what they want because that's how you get heated rear seats and more content in a car by taking it out of places you don't see. This is a bit of a different equation. This is based off of the TC platform, so what that means is all around you've got wishbones instead of, say, a torsion bar. But how does that translate to driving dynamics out on roads like these? So driving dynamics in C-segment cars, we generally don't put those two things together in the same sentence. And not because they're bad cars, it's just there's a spectrum, and we've discussed this before. At the top of the spectrum, there's like the Volkswagen and the Mazda. At the bottom of the spectrum, there's the Hyundai. And basically, one is more aggressive in its handling. It's tuned for more people like us, where the Hyundai is tuned for more value. This is somewhere squarely in the middle. And in fairness, I've been driving this car on roads it really wasn't designed to be driven on, and I've been driving it pretty hard. So there's a couple of things. There's no doubt about it. This is a sub $20,000 car, so there's definitely going to be some squat, pitch, dive, and roll. In this particular case, there's a good amount of roll in the rear when you're going around turns here. So like you feel it coming around on the back side of the car, the outside of the car when you're pushing through a turn. I would say that if you wanted to really have a Scion and tune this thing out, they do some TRD coils. So I'd say some coilovers in the back would probably make you right as rain going around a declining radius turn like this. But back to that front end, let's go through another set of declining radius turns here. I've noticed as I push through more sharper turns, the traction control light likes to come on, which is telling me that the car is managing the front end more as I push through turns like this. So it's really controlling the front end pitch. So notice how composed this really very softly sprung $18,000 car, it's going through, I gotta say, kind of like a champ. And actually it kind of makes the noises going around turn, which makes for a lot of fun. Friends, this is the point of our story where we normally talk about the interior, but this being a Scion, I feel we should go for a round of the options game. So let's begin. 2016 Scion IM, base price $18,460. End of options game. And the point of this abbreviated options game is there are no options. Basically, that's the way Scion has been doing it since the beginning of Scion. There's even things like power folding mirrors, and you get 2 years of service on this thing. Those are the kind of things you see on like BMWs and Mercedes, not fancy Toyotas, which brings us back to the interior. So what's really in there? Because if you're doing a whole value proposition, what kind of stuff sets this car apart? Well, things like there's an HVAC system in there. It's like a dual climate control system, which is very cool. But what's really cool about it is it has toggle switches like an old school Jaguar. Then there's a larger screen, like it's set up for a nav screen. But really what's cool about that screen is you get a backup camera. Then there's like the usual complement of tilt, telescopic wheel, all that kind of stuff. And the build quality of the interior actually is a couple of steps above you would see in the rest of the C segment class. But really, how does that translate to the time you spend in the car? If I'm being honest, I've never been a huge fan of Toyota interiors, but believe it or not, starting with the Corolla, I really like what they've done with the interior, where they've put together this like dashboard look here. And when I say dashboard, like old school, like old time dashboard look, where it is a board. But in this case, it's more stylized. Like they took some of the chunkiness of the Lexus IS interior, which I love, but made it more upright here. It's a little bit more like Brooklyn hipster-esque. And you've got this big screen here, and I love the HVAC system where it's got all these electronic controls in the HVAC system. And there's a bunch of like whiz-bang apps in here, things that I don't even pretend to get into now that we're in the world of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so I only think it's going to be about a year or so until Scion actually gives us this here, especially when you consider really who's looking to buy these cars, or really who Toyota is looking to sell this car to. It's even more important that they have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay in this car. But overall, a very pleasant place to be, like more than I expected it to be. The only knock I could give here is you can't get a sunroof, and that's because it's a whole thing about the pricing and the fixed pricing. They don't want to offer an $800 option to somebody that may not take it in order to keep the price down overall. Me, I want the sunroof. So in summary, what do we got? Well, we've got a car that sits in different places depending on the spectrum in which you look. Like, for example, in driving dynamics, there's like the super high driving dynamics of like a GTI, and you've got in the lower end of the spectrum of that Hyundai Elantra we talked about. This is very much the middle of the road of driving dynamics, so kind of around the town. But if you're looking more on the value side of things, like do you want some flash, do you want some style, do you want a very cool set of stuff on the interior, this is very much on the high end of the scale. And that's kind of what Scion has been doing since the days Scion has started, which I have to admit, I've been kind of puzzled by Scion from the day one. Granted, they have the one price deal, so you don't have to haggle, and you get all this stuff, including a very loud color like this. But really, I want to leave you guys with a question based on that. This car competes with a lot of cars out there that we've talked about, but it also competes with a car that actually Toyota makes. So my question to you is this: would you choose this car in this flash color with more flash style, or would you choose the Corolla? And don't just tell me which one you would choose, tell me why. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, I think I'm going to go look for a car that is perhaps less obnoxious in color.